Thank you, Matt. So I'll introduce myself just quickly. I'm Jane, as we mentioned, and I'm introducing you. Let me try this. Instead of defaulting to Ziti, what I wrote down was Zithobile, and I'm sure I got that wrong, but I'll ask for forgiveness. But welcome is really all I'm going to say, and a little bit of what I read about you and sort of how I've connected what I could glean from reading about you and what Matt shared to the purpose of the Leadership Forum community. And then there's a logistical slide that Matt, you will tell me when. I don't pull that up, right? You do. But here's the frame. So when we do these sessions, and I feel like everyone on the call might have been part of them in the past, so I won't belabor it, but the Leadership Forum, for me, it's a community, and I've been part of it on and off for almost 20 years, which I can't believe. I did the math, Steve, to think about when did I first go to Silver Bay, and it was in 2002. So that's freaking me out a little. Anyway, so I don't want to spend too much time, but welcome, Ziti. When I read about your title of your talk, Authentic Leadership for an Inclusive Future, here's how it connected to what the Leadership Forum community has been for me. First, community, of course. So just the fact that your connectivity is there, I think this is one of the most beautiful things that happened for me every time I went in the summer, and what I love that Matt and others have conceptualized to make this an all year round opportunity is this idea that like-minded people who are in different ways focusing on how to make the world better in small ways and big ways, and companies and organizations. So clearly that's one of the things that you'll talk to us about. The other was as a member of the board, and we've got a few other board members and our leaders here. It's really a moment, I think, for the Leadership Forum where we're sort of doubling down on the core purpose, which has always been about exploration and dealing with tough challenges and hard issues that show up in organizations. And even more recently, in the past few weeks, to honor one of the, I don't know if Mark Johnson was a founder, but he was like a moral center for this group. I don't actually know him, believe it or not. I never got to meet him, but this idea of conscious leadership is becoming really significant, and we're really committing to looking at that. And so that's all. What I wanted to say that I saw when I was reading about you, and I didn't get all the way through it, Ziti, but it sounds like you've had an up close personal encounter with Mark Zuckerberg. So I'd love to ask you more about that. But the question you asked him said, okay, this was a perfect fit, a very provocative, challenging question. So we talk a lot about that. So that's all I really want to say. Please share with us some of your background though, because we want to get to know you and build community with you and around you. And so I think that's it for me, Matt, as far as an intro. I hope that's okay. I did it my own way, no surprise. But did I miss anything, Matt? And then we'll do the logistics part before we just really jump all the way in.
Yeah, that's fine, Jane. Thank you for introducing Ziti and
welcome. I hope Ziti.
kind of setting the tone for our ILC. And again, you know, I've known Ziti now for a couple years and had the pleasure of seeing her in action. So she's a wonderful facilitator, great community leader, and really excited to have her here presenting and sharing with us some insight of authentic leadership for an inclusive future, as that is definitely the times that we're in. How do we make sure that we're being inclusive to everyone around us? So thank you, Ziti, for joining us here today, and I'll pass it over to you and look forward to what you have to share.
Thank you both. Thank you, Jane, so much for the introduction. Thank you, Matt, for the invitation. I'm really, really excited to be able to spend the next hour or so with you all. Like you, I'm pretty informal in my approach. I do like structure, but I like the informality of dialogue. So what I'll do is introduce myself, and we'll talk about the pronunciation of my name just a little bit. And through the introduction of my career and higher education journey, you'll learn a little bit more about who I am and why it is that I do what I do. But my name is Zithobile, and Ziti has always been my nickname. And my last name is Nxumalo. And I was sharing before, we formally started, that the X in our one of our languages in Southern Africa, it's pronounced like a click in the back of your mouth, like the way that you would call horses or train horses. And so the language is actually called Xhosa, and it's spelled Xhosa. And it's the language that was spoken in the Black Panther movie. So you can imagine how surprised I was sitting there in the movie theater and listening to them speak and recognizing it, because I didn't know at that time that they actually did study Xhosa to use for the movie. So that made Southern Africa really cool all of a sudden. Um, I am originally from Swaziland, and what I'm going to do is, a lot of what we'll talk about today around this authentic leadership will relate to what I've come to learn about the common challenges that exist even within diverse environments. Jane, you asked about my experience with Mark Zuckerberg. At the time, I was going through the PhD program at North Carolina A&T, and I was serving as the chair of communication for the Graduate Student Advisory Commission, which is like the graduate student SGA. And so as an officer for that organization, I got a chance to be a part of this virtual town hall. Well, it was in person, but it was streamed live on Facebook. And it was around the year when Mark Zuckerberg decided, you know what, I want to get out of Silicon Valley. I want to get more connected to the world around me so that I can make more empathetic decisions for Facebook, which is really interesting to consider that now within the context of all that's going on in the role of social media and all of that. But the question that I asked him had to do with his role as an entrepreneur in diversifying those entrepreneurial circles. Because as we know, if we all went to Silicon Valley, we'd be hard pressed to find a lot of Black or minority or women entrepreneurs for that matter. They're kind of an anomaly there and in a lot of other places. And so, the question got a lot of attention and his response got even more attention. And that's how I ended up becoming a contributor for HuffPost, because I wrote a response to Blavity, I think. One of the contributors there wrote about my question, which he basically didn't answer it. That's the short of it. If you want to know more about his response, we can talk offline. But Nancy, I see your question in the chat. Yes, this is one of Miriam Makeba's languages. So my dad was born in Swaziland, mom is South African. Both of them speak 7 languages fluently, including English. And so in a lot of African countries, including South Africa and Swaziland, it's common for people to speak English. In South Africa, it's Xhosa, Zulu, Sesotho, Siswati, Afrikaans. So yeah, that's one of the languages for sure. So in terms of my background, I graduated from Dudley High School here in Greensboro, North Carolina. And I ended up getting a full tuition scholarship to Spelman College. I lost the scholarship. That again is another talk for another day. But in true like full circle fashion, now that I've got the PhD, I'm still friends with a friend that I met at the time at Spelman, and she's now a professor at Spelman. And so I recently got a chance to be a guest lecturer at the very school that I lost the scholarship to. So don't give up, kids. I left Spelman, ended up finishing up undergrad at Guilford College. My 4-year undergraduate journey took 9 years, y'all. And it's because I didn't have the kind of guidance that I needed in order to really identify who I really was and what it is that I really needed to contribute. And so I ended up majoring in business. And because of all the transfer credits I had, I minored in money and finance, human resources management, and African American studies. And then I ended up working for 3.5 years in the office of the president at Bennett College. So, when you think about leadership, that was kind of like my entrance into what higher education leadership could look like. I then went on to get my master's in communication studies from UNC Greensboro. After that, I immediately began teaching full-time at GTCC, and I was in the communication department there, teaching public speaking, communication. I've always been like a soft skills person, all of those non-cognitive skills that we need in order to succeed in diverse environments. I then went on to teach in the speech department at A&T, and I'm currently teaching an ethics in communication class at A&T, and I got my PhD in leadership studies from A&T. Started my business, Deftable, did some work in the nonprofit sector with the fundraising campaign for Hayes Taylor YMCA. I got recruited by Northwestern Mutual and became the first woman in the Greensboro office to hit their sales and productivity milestone called Pacesetter 40. So, talk about being in a non-diverse environment. I was recruited because they wanted their financial representatives to be more representative of the populations that they wanted to serve. And here in Greensboro, Black people make up about 40% of the population, but if you look at the professional circles, it's not always representative of that. And so it's a challenge that I'm directly connected to helping address here. And then I recently got certified as an executive leadership coach through the Center for Creative Leadership. And so I've been doing quite a bit of virtual work with women in leadership right now. It is such an exciting time, y'all, for people who really care about the field of leadership, the transformation of what leadership is going to look like in the future. And I share all that information just to give a foundation for what deftable is. The word deft, it's one of my all-time favorites because it's underutilized, but it's just a cool word. You can be deft as a football player, as a dancer, as a writer. What it means to be deft is to be skilled, to be clever. And so everything that we do as a business is about helping leaders and communicators be more deft, more skillful in their communication and leadership practices. And so if you wanted to kind of pare it down to my areas of expertise, so to speak, I study human behavior. I mean, before I ever started my PhD program, little Zitty was, conducting semi-structured interviews in the community my whole life. I love talking to people. I love listening to people. I have spent my entire life, from the time I was a little immigrant child, I turned 5 years old 2 months after we got to Greensboro. And so I've spent my time as a foreigner, in a distant land, listening to different people. And I can tell you, just based on my personal and professional experience, that now more than ever, the world is literally craving strong, authentic leaders. And, we've, in America in particular, we've had such a hyper focus on financial capital, and we're literally living through the effects of that because the financial advancement of many of us has come at the expense of the social capital. And if we do not take social capital seriously moving into the future of leadership, we are doomed. That sounds dramatic, but I really believe that because again, look around us. We're so disconnected. I'm a early model millennial. I heard a friend of mine describe it that way. So like I grew up in the age where pagers were a big deal. My mom did not let me get a cell phone. I didn't have one until I was in my mid-20s. And so the adjustment of like figuring out how to lead with technology and how to influence in that sort of a way, I mean, it's changing everything. And so we've got to be really, really forward thinking if we want to take effective leadership seriously for the future. So here's where we are with the common challenges. And I just want to paint a few organizational scenarios. And I want you all to really think about whether you recognize yourself or stories that you've heard from other people, other leaders that you're connected to. First scenario here, managing people. So I've had clients that I've worked with who may have been really, really successful leading projects, but they're new at leading people. And so that transition is often a really, really challenging one. And that's something that we can talk about addressing through authentic leadership. Second scenario here, how in the world do we curate an honest culture? I've spoken to many leaders who may have a team of 150 people, let's say, but they're always concerned about what the team members really think or how they really feel about them. They may have like an inkling that the people on their team are just saying what it is that they want to hear. And they want to learn how to celebrate truth telling and not become an organization that ostracizes the dissenting opinion, that ostracizes the truth tellers, but instead embraces them. Though those are, by and large, the most innovative organizations, the ones that are able to welcome that truth telling. Growing an exemplary team. You might have individuals who have really high potential within the team or even prospects that you intend to recruit. How in the world do you bring out the best in each of these really, really different individuals with different communication styles, different perceptions of information, different processing speeds, and how do you leverage the best of all of those people in order to take the business to the next level? And then another one, navigating difficult personalities. I was recently on a call with a leader of a bank, and you all who may, be resistant to this surge in technology, it's something that we really, really have to take seriously, because, there was a time when difficult personalities, let's say you've got the guy in the office who's able to hit the sales numbers out of the park every month, but their interpersonal relations with people in the business are, perceived as offensive or, irreverent or whatever. Well, now people are recording videos and posting them on TikTok. So you've got difficult so-and-so in the workplace that ends up becoming a liability for the business if we're not able to really directly address these sorts of things. And so for a lot of reasons, we have to take human capital and relationships within the workplace really, really seriously, because these psychosocial tensions that we're all living through right now are only going to heighten with the passing of time if we don't have leaders who are really willing to think about it and plan through it. So before we move any further, I'm a teacher, so I'm always like, student engagement. I want to just pause for a moment. If you're not comfortable speaking it aloud, I would love for you to put in the chat if there are any initial curiosities, questions, reflections based on the things that I've shared so far. Or if there's something in particular that you hope to gain from the rest of this presentation, because that'll help me to know what to highlight based on who's in our virtual room here. So just any comment, question, feedback about any of the stuff that we're talking about. Put it in.
Curating an honest culture. That can be a challenge that I see where I am, because it's because I've only been here just a little over a year, and so I'm coming into a culture that has allowed some things, and now that I've been here a year, I'm looking around and going, that needs to change.
Yeah.
Because it's beginning to impact what I'm able to do, or making sure that logistical things happen the way they should. So I'm definitely interested in that.
Yeah, I mean, honest cultures, if your culture is dishonest, it slows down processes. You end up finding yourself, doing damage control because you're moving forward based on assumptions and emoting and ideas instead of based on what's actually going on. And so if you've got the truth tellers convening by the water cooler on some gossip culture, as opposed to people speaking up in the actual meeting, you just end up reacting and doing damage control. So yeah, absolutely.
Or people saying one thing in a meeting and then not doing it.
Absolutely. There's no accountability there. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Much to say about all these things, but because time is limited, we're going to just have to keep going. I did want to share with this group that although this information is being condensed a bit into this 1 hour segment, the work that we do, I mean, I've done week-long programs, 8-hour programs, 4-hour programs. We're really great at customizing processes depending on whatever your needs are. So if you are interested in additional conversation, we can certainly do that. I'm looking in the chat. Anne says, how to deal with diverse perspectives in an honest culture is a challenge. Yep, if you ask for honesty, you have to be willing to deal with it. And that's a competency. That's a skill. And we'll talk about what that looks like in action. Kathy says, really like the 4 common challenges. Add a 5th, absolutely. When managers move up to be the managers of managers, yes, with regard to them moving from managing first-line supervisors to leading others. Absolutely, that hierarchy matters, power dynamics, all of that. And getting results through others. Also navigating difficult personalities, handling, resolving conflict, definitely. Yeah, thank you all for that. And hopefully what we'll talk about will, pique more interest so that we can have additional conversation. So let's define what we mean by authentic. Before we even go there, when we talk about authentic leadership, we're not talking about authenticity in and of itself. Sometimes authentic Zitty wants to dance around the room and scream. I'm not going to do that in a meeting because authenticity within a leadership context takes into consideration other people. And so what we're talking about moving forward is just that. It's how do we show up as our genuine selves within the context of relationships with other people. These are other people who have their own opinions about who we are, their own perspectives about what we should do. You know how people are, y'all. It's hard to be fully yourself. It's harder for some than others in certain professional environments. So that's what we're talking about. What a shame it is in the field of leadership that we've gotten so far away from being real in the workplace that theorists, researchers had to come together to develop a formula for how to do that. But here we are. And according to these researchers, there are 4 dimensions or 4 characteristics that a leader who is perceived as authentic by their team or by their followers, these are the 4 characteristics that we are supposed to have. Now, as I go over these definitions, I may need to go over them in more entirety once we actually go through this brief assessment. But if you have direct questions related to these as we go along, please feel free to chime in. I can't see a notification from the chat yet, so you might just have to unmute and chime in. So otherwise, I'm just going to keep going. So the first of the 4 dimensions is self-awareness, kind of self-explanatory. This is, are you aware of how your words and actions impact other people? If you don't have strong self-awareness, that means you're the guy that everybody's talking about, or you're the woman that everybody's talking about by the water cooler, where you think you're making leaps and bounds, in terms of progress with the cohesion of the team, and everybody except you knows about whatever your glaring elephant in the room is. You want to know who you are and how it is that you're coming off to other people, because your intent may not necessarily be the same as the impact that you're making. The second dimension or characteristic is called internalized moral perspective. If you all have been heavily involved in the leadership field, which it sounds like many of you have been, a lot of fields call it congruence. All that means is, do you know what your personal values are? And then when people look at your day-to-day life and your leadership decisions, do they align? The person who scores low on internalized moral perspective is the individual who's viewed as a hypocrite by the people on their team. And so I believe, was that you, Karen, who mentioned that? People who were saying one thing in the meeting. Oh, forgive me. Whoever the last person was who said, you're saying one thing in the meeting, but then there's no accountability.
That's me. That was me.
Okay. Yeah. That's what we're talking about. Are you just sounding off in the meeting and signing up for all kinds of committees, but then when it comes time to execute, you're doing nothing,
You ghost people.
You ghost people, stop doing that.
Right.
Yeah, we know that.
Right. The third characteristic is called balanced processing. And, I'm going to use our current, and I'm only going to do this because Jane already opened up the door to the political conversation. This is a nonpartisan statement. This is simply an observation based on a neutral analysis of the communication of the current president. I was in a class last semester where one of the members of the class said that, wouldn't President Trump be considered authentic? That's part of the appeal, is that he's like the non-political politician, the anti-politician. So for people who are fed up with the political correctness, he disrupts that sort of normalcy in a way that's really appealing to a lot of people. Well, according to authentic leadership theory, balanced processing would be one of the most easily identifiable areas where communication scholars would say that he's lacking. What we mean by balanced processing is that a leader who is perceived as authentic by others, they have an ability to listen to opinions that differ from their own, especially those that differ from their own. And after having listened to a variety of perspectives, they are able to make a just and fair decision in consideration of all those varying perspectives. So at the end of the day, you might not necessarily agree with the outcome or the decision, but you cannot say that this individual didn't weigh fairly the different pieces of information and make a just decision. All right. So those who are heavy critics of the current president and his particular style of communication would say that his orientation toward decision making is heavily biased. Now, certainly if you asked him, he would say the same about other, prior leaders and his current opponent. But what I say that to say, hopefully it's just an illustration of what that might look like. The person who scores strongly in balanced processing is exactly the person who you want at the head of the table in the meeting, because they're fair, they're just, and they are respected by the others in the room. Does that make sense? Give me a thumbs up if it does. Yeah, excellent. Thank you. I'm looking at the chat. Lynette, Lynette says that you're so curious what I'm seeing out there in terms of trends in virtual remote work. Great question. There are no more water coolers, and I see this trend trigger all kinds of challenges in work culture from organic trust. Yeah, absolutely. One of the patterns that I see among others is the meeting after the meeting. So people are Zooming, but then there's another Zoom after the Zoom to debrief the Zoom. It's maddening. People also are just going old school phone call. Like, can you believe that? People are private chatting, if you're facilitating a Zoom and you don't disable the function for people to send messages individually to others, people are doing all kinds of private junk talking in the chat on Zoom. So mistrust is still there. It's just amplified in a virtual context because, it's just it's just amplified in a virtual context, because now if we're typing things, they're forever memorialized. And if we're recording Zoom meetings, they're forever memorialized. So there's even, from my opinion, a greater level of care that we have to take in our communication because of this virtual format. Yeah. Then the fourth and final dimension is relational transparency. Again, we're talking about transparency within the leadership context. I'm not saying you come to work and tell all your colleagues your personal business. I'm saying that as a leader, to be relationally transparent, you don't want to be the person who lays off the entire department on Friday and nobody knew that the company was even in trouble. And that's something that we're seeing quite a lot of. The amplification of what revenue looks like, but then when the pandemic hits, the reality of what revenue looks like sets in, and now people are furloughed and laid off and had no idea that we weren't even in the black. That's the kind of stuff that we're seeing. And that's a matter of lack of authenticity in leadership through a lack of relational transparency. And so I know that a lot of these concepts challenge the traditional leadership models, which are all about like kind of hoarding knowledge, using power over people as a strategy for controlling things. As you can see, groups of people of any kind, of any background, when they feel like they're being controlled, after a while, there's a rebellion that's going to happen. And so we want to be leaders who are, again, forward thinking and working in ways that are in light of what the future of leadership is going to have to look like. Two other quick things before we do the assessment. Just to kind of pull everything together here, I wanted to pull this two direct quotes actually that speak to what we're talking about. Teams led by authentic leaders tend to enjoy more positive outcomes, just in terms of like team cohesion, quality of work and life, retention, succession planning, and then also ultimately more productivity, which leads to more revenue generation. And so that is what the general consensus is around this authentic leadership theory and the data that's been collected. The second reality that we have to address in this year of 2020 of our Lord is that there are certain people who belong to historically oppressed groups, like women, like Black people, like other minorities, who have often been put in the position to make a difficult decision in a professional environment. Do I behave in a way that is authentic to me? Authentic to the language that comes innately to me, authentic to the dress and the aesthetic that comes authentic to me? Or do I choose to conform according to the standards of other people? What that looks like for someone like me is, I mean, you all would have no idea the amount of thought that has gone into what my hair looks like when I go into an office. I don't know if you could see it through the camera, but I have what are called locks, dreadlocks. Just, it was a big deal in the military, big deal in the professional world. It's literally my hair as it grows out of my head, and it's a professional issue for me. Some of you may not have ever related to an issue like that, but that has a psychosocial impact. A friend of mine has written an entire doctoral dissertation around Black women and our hair in professional spaces. Also, you know, I mentioned working at Northwestern Mutual, being a woman in a predominantly male environment, there were marked differences in my communication style, the communication style of my target demographic, which were professional women, and the style of the younger financial advisors who were watching Wolf of Wall Street and approaching everybody with this really hyper aggressive, you know, kind of approach. And so I met resistance from day one about, you know, my kind of softer, more feminine approach to relationship building. And it's still an
Can
issue.
I
It's
can I
something
jump in there for a second? There's actually, we talked, going back to the issue of with your hair and locks, because I have locks, if you can see my picture. There is a bill in Pennsylvania that's being put forth called the Crown Bill, and it's all around what is acceptable, women being able to wear their natural hair in the workplace. It has to be legislated.
It's maddening. And so you think about the financial implications.
Yes, Robert, that's what I said.
Yeah, literally. And so, you know, think about the role of media in disrupting what the self-concept of, let's say, the Black woman. So media imagery, there's a Eurocentric standard of beauty that's normalized. So then you've got young girls looking at these Eurocentric images, young girls who look like me, looking at Eurocentric images. So then you are spending all this money to make yourself look more Eurocentric, whether it's adjusting your skin, your hair texture, all these things. But then at the same time, Black womanhood is commoditized and then sold back to us. So when you look at Black women and our buying power, Black women spend more money on beauty products than like any other demographic, you know? So again, that's a whole other conversation for a whole other day. But I just say that to say that all of these things are really, really connected. I hope that I'm not losing you all and, you know, bringing in all these different topics. But the bottom line is, if you want to diversify your workforce, there is stamina and education involved in learning how a lack of diversity and a lack of true inclusion has impacted the people that you want to recruit. So with that, we're going to do a quick assessment, y'all. It's really simple, only 16 items. This is by no means like a rigorous exploration of you and your authentic leadership, but what it will do is hopefully kind of present questions that you might not have considered. So if you don't already have a sheet of paper, I'd love for you to get some paper and number it from 1 through 16. 1 through 16.
Oh, okay.
And we're going to go through each item 1 through 16. And at the end, you'll be able to score yourself in all 4 of those dimensions to see if there are any immediate kind of red flags in terms of areas that you may need to develop. Now, of course, in order to get the most robust feedback, you want to administer this kind of an assessment not only for yourself, but among the people who are a part of your team, so that you could see whether your perception of self aligns with the way that you're perceived, right? And I'm looking at the chat. Yeah, Nancy, it is in fact a real thing. And then Robert says how to break the pattern of hiring people like me. Yeah, it's easy and convenient to hire people just like us. It really does take skill, effort, and stamina to integrate, quite frankly. Yeah. All right. So self-assessment, really easy, 5-point Likert scale. So you're going to want to use the number 1 to indicate that you strongly disagree. all the way to 5, strongly agree. Of course, if you don't necessarily have an opinion, you can use 3 for neutral. And with these kinds of assessments, as you all know, you could answer them differently tomorrow than today, depending on where you are. Just answer them as honestly as you possibly can, all right? I can list my 3 greatest weaknesses. Disagree or agree? Where do you rank? Number 2, my actions reflect my core values. Number 3, I seek others' opinions before making up my own mind. Number 4, I openly share my feelings with others. Number 5, I can list my 3 greatest strengths. And remember that as you're answering this, you're answering it within that leadership context. So like number 4, for example, when you talk about openly sharing your feelings with others, that's within the workplace. You wouldn't share the same feelings among like intimate friends as you would with your colleagues. It just means like openly, if you have a dissenting opinion about a project, you're open about that instead of just kind of ruminating about it and then talking to your spouse about it when you get home or something, you know? Number 6, I do not allow group pressure to control me. Number 7, I listen closely to the ideas of those who disagree with me. Number 8, I let others in my workplace know who I truly am as a person. There's this whole issue of like having to sever yourself from yourself when you walk into the workplace. We really can't do that as humans if we acknowledge our humanity, you know? Number 9, I seek feedback as a way of understanding who I really am as a person. Number 10, other people know where I stand on controversial issues. Number 11, I do not emphasize my own point of view at the expense of others. Not a fan of the wording of some of these questions. They seem a little more confusing than they need to be, but I did not develop this assessment. I'm administering it. Number 12, I rarely present a false front to others. Oh, and I saw the question in the chat about Lewis, one of the researchers who contributed toward this data. All of the names in this, and I'm happy to send the list of sources for anyone who's interested, but they're all considered communication and leadership researchers. So they come from the academy, and several of them do have a psychological background, but by and large, they're influences in higher ed. Number 13, I accept the feelings I have about myself. Number 14, my morals guide what I do as a leader. Number 15, I listen very carefully to the ideas of others before making a decision. And then finally, I admit my mistakes to others. So what you'll do now, and I'll just go ahead and put all of these up here so that you can take a moment to tally up your responses. But if you add up the numbers that you scored for questions 1, 5, 9, and 13, those are designed to measure your self-awareness. And then you'll just go straight down the line and see the dimensions that are measured by each one. And at the end, you should have 4 raw scores, each of which is supposed to be kind of a baseline representation of where you stand on those 4 dimensions.
2, 6, 10, and 14.
We'll take about 30 more seconds to add those up. All right, does anybody need more time? Just raise your hand for me real quick if you do. You need a little more time? Okay. We'll take like 15 more seconds. Gosh, Matt and I, we chatted about this yesterday, and I was like, time always goes by so fast when I just, we do this in an hour. But I want to make sure we have a chance to do a little bit of discussion.
9, 13, 18.
Old school math, remember that?
Yeah. Woohoo.
Any chance you can go back one slide just to see one question real quick, please?
Sure. This one?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
All set, thank you.
Okay. All right, so I won't have everyone share your score for you. But, the reason why this information is so important, y'all, is because, again, as mentioned before, if we're talking about the future of organizations and we're talking about really directly addressing things like implicit bias, things like systemic racism, those things that are making everybody have, the creepy crawlies right now, we have to become the kinds of leaders who are willing to call out the elephant in the room. And part of that means acknowledging what emotional investment means in organizational development. Here again is another direct quote. This is a book called Adaptive Leadership. It was one of my favorites when I was going through the leadership studies program. And what it really talked about was, here in this sentence, one distinctive aspect of leading adaptive change is that you must connect with the values, beliefs, and anxieties of the people you're trying to move. And so again, if you're a predominantly male environment and you're bringing in women, there are really specific anxieties around what it has been to be a successful professional woman in this good old American South, And if we're not willing to call it out and talk about it in really plain terms, then we're kidding ourselves. The same thing with being, the first Black team member in a predominantly white team, or Latino, or whatever, or transgender, whatever these differences, these diversities are, we've got to be willing to really acknowledge the anxieties and beliefs and values associated with those. Because again, what the future is going to require is a transition from systems type leadership thinking to community type leadership thinking. And so again, in the past, if you look at old leadership research, we talk about people as in terms of their functionality, their hard skills. We talk about people in terms of robotics and hard contributions to the organization in a way that tends to negate the heart. But we now know that, again, we need communities-based leadership models that acknowledge and celebrate people, acknowledge their genuine and innate gifts and their individual purposes in life. And there was a time in higher education where we didn't use terminology like that, like your gift, your purpose in life. But I taught in the School of Health and Human Sciences at UNCG, these classes called Life Design. And I'm going to show you all a quick video before we open up for discussion in these last few minutes. But in that Life Design class, it was about connecting to the heart and the gifts of the students so that they're selecting majors that are in alignment with who they authentically are, and not just who the world told them they should be, mama and daddy told them they should be. Because I'm an example of that kid who took 9 years to finish my 4 years. And it was because I wasn't raised to be authentic. You know, I was raised to conform to certain environments that as an adult, I now know just aren't conducive to my highest and best productivity. So I'm going to stop the screen share, pull up this video really quick, share the video, and then we'll wrap it up. But while I'm pulling up that video, are there any initial comments? How do you all feel about your scores? Are there any initial questions?
I'm not sure where I am in terms of what my scores mean.
Thank you.
So the highest score that you can get in any of these, sorry, y'all, bear with me. I'm trying to like multitask, pull up this video and answer the question at the same time. So you have a potential of up to 20 points for each one. So let's say you strongly agreed for each category. And if you were to, you know, self-assess and you got a 5 all the way across the board, you can get up to 20 full points, right? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay.
if you ranked yourself lower in that area, it may be a simple indication that you can work to develop that a bit more. So does anyone mind sharing like what area you may have scored the lowest? Or if there's a particular category that you want a clarification on?
I scored, my lowest was internalized moral perspective, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
I have my own moral compass. I'm
That
not
was
sure
mine too. Don't feel bad.
I don't know if it's showing up in workplace, so maybe
Yeah.
reflection there.
Yeah, and again, I mean, remember that, you know, 16 items is not a rigorous assessment. What I would challenge you to consider is within the workplace, do people know where you stand on controversial issues? Are you, whatever your values are in relation to those values and their impact on your business, are you the kind of person who makes known what your values are, or are you just kind of showing up to do whatever the boss says kind of thing? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think I started answering it personally before you clarified, and I probably would add 20s on everything, but
Yeah.
maybe.
All right, so I'm going to show this quick video, and then we'll be basically out of time. So remember, we left off talking about this idea of buy-in from other people. And so this is a video that I've shown in my classes with college students, but I really love showing them with professional folks as well.
How do I know? A lot of people, when they think of the phrase, how do I know, they always want to put the what behind it. How do I know what I'm supposed to do? The question that you really should ask is, how do I know why I'm here? Because when you know your why, your what becomes more clear and more impactful. If you know, like for instance, people know that I do comedy, but that's what I do. My why is to inspire people to walk in purpose. So I can do comedy, I can write books, I can be in a movie, because all of it is motivated by my why. In fact, I have a new web series out called Michael Jr. Break Time. We probably just did the 6th episode. It's on YouTube. So every single Wednesday at 3 o'clock, we drop a new episode on YouTube of Michael Jr. Break Time. What it is it's me. I travel around the country and I do stand-up comedy, in case you didn't know. And in the middle of my comedy set sometime, I'll stop and just talk to my audience. And we've been filming this, and it's, you know, it's pretty cool. So we're in Winston-Salem. I'm gonna show you a clip from Winston-Salem. And I'm just talking to this guy in the audience, and he tells me that he's a musical instructor at a school. So I was like, all right, you're a musical instructor, you know, can you sing? Let me hear you sing a song. So this is what happened at the last episode of Michael Jr.'s Break Time. Check it. So you're a musical director? Yes, sir. All right, so let me get a couple bars of like Amazing Grace. Can you do the first part of that? Go ahead. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Wow. I could sing. You know what I'm saying? to give it a version is if your uncle just got out of jail, you got shot in the back when you was a kid. I'm just saying, let me see the hood version real quick. If you know which version I'm talking about, just see if that exists. Let me see what you got. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now, right now I'm found, was blind, but now I see.
All right. So the moral of the story is, I mean, it's, he's a comedian, and so he makes light of statements like, sing it like your daddy just got out of jail, your mama just got shot in the back. The grounded view that I wanted to take of that is that people's individual stories are part of the diversity that they bring into a workplace. And so, if as leaders we have this ability to authentically connect to people's individual stories and then bring the most authentic parts of ourselves into the workplace as well, we really get the best out of people. We get the richest innovations and the most interesting experiences. So, with that, y'all, we literally have 4 minutes left. I know I'm a chatty lady. I hope to maybe break us out into rooms, but we won't have time for that. I would love to hear final thoughts, and I'm looking in the chat as well for what's in there. Questions, thoughts?
I just wanted to suggest a book when you're talking about being authentic leaders. A college colleague of mine just published a book called The Extraordinary Power of Leader Humility. You can go on Amazon and look for it. The author's name is Marilyn Gist, Gist. But I listened to a seminar, the webinar that she did the week before the book was published. And some of the things that you're talking about in terms of balance, particularly balance processing and relational transparency, it really kind of coincides with what she's talking about in the book in terms of leader humility. So I just wanted to put that out there to enhance the understanding of all of this stuff that you've been talking about today, which I think is really, really great.
Thank you for that. I've added it to my book of reads. I also see Kathy's recommendation of the book, Head, Heart, and Guts. Yeah, that sounds amazing. All of them are important, absolutely. Yep, scores change, and I agree. Sometimes mine may change from day to day, depending on when you ask me. Kurt, oh, Robert, you know Kurt. That's awesome. Kurt and I met through a mutual friend, I think. Yeah, that's amazing.
He's a neat guy.
Definitely one of my favorites. Thank you all. Oh, my audio was messed up. Sorry. All right. Any final questions? I'm going to pass it back to you, Matt, if nobody has anything else to contribute. But I just thank you all again, just for your time, for your comments, your participation, everything. It's great.
Yes. Thank you, Ziddy. That was amazing, very insightful. I think people was able to learn a lot. So thank you all for joining us today. Keep in mind that we will have a coffee hour tomorrow as well. Ziddy, I believe you will be available for that. If not, just let me know. But you can feel free to join the coffee hour. I put the link in the chat here. yeah, again, I learned a lot about myself, very introspective, much appreciated, Zitty. And lastly, if I can get my screens together here, I will be sharing our next ILC, which will be coming up on November 11th with Mandy Williams. So keep that in mind if you really enjoyed this one. The next one's going to be great too. Also putting that Zoom link there at the back. So yeah, thank you, Zitty. Much appreciated. We'll be following up with you, and definitely reach out to Zitty if you have any other questions, or check out Deftable. She does amazing work, and she's someone that you definitely want on your team. So thanks. And
Thank
enjoy.
you.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Zitty. It was great.
Likewise.
Thank you, Zitty. It was really awesome. Nice to meet you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.